And here we are at the center of the arc, trapped in the gaudiest, most valuable, and most improbable water wheel the world has ever seen. James Baldwin. Second quote, everything now we must assume is in our hands. We have no right to assume otherwise. Second quote by James Baldwin. Last and certainly not least, going straight is not the same thing as going forward. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome high school quarterback, Cubs fan, honorary doctorate, novelist, the Springsteen of Obama's White House, speechwriter, and per British GQ, one of the coolest 35 men under 38 and a half. Passing the torch with Cody Keenan starts now. First and foremost, welcome to the show, and thank you for joining me.
Dude, that is the best intro ever. I'm making that like my new LinkedIn headline. So the GQ thing was like 10 years ago. I no longer fall under that age, but I appreciate it.
I didn't want to say that, right? I'll give it to you. No, thank you. I've been so excited about this interview. Ever since I've read your book, and then I saw you on a podcast, a Brian Hawk's podcast a couple years ago. And this is my book of dream podcast guests, and you've been in here for a couple years. And just to kind of give some perspective, this week alone, Nate Boyer was on my podcast, the Green Beret philanthropist. Kurt Warner was on my podcast yesterday. But I told my wife, like, there's something about this episode. I'm so excited to talk to you. So, Cody, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you for your service, and congratulations on retirement.
Thank you. All right. So I asked one of my closest friends is from Chicago, and we'll get into some more serious questions, but I said, hey, I explained who you were to him. And he said, since you're from Chicago, I have to ask you these two questions. First is deep dish or tavern?
It's tavern is your everyday go-to pizza, right? You can't eat deep dish every day or you'll be dead. But I do like it every once in a while. It's, I don't like it when people are like, oh, deep dish is just for tourists. Like, it's good. We should be proud of it. It's a good pizza. I'm a Geno's East guy. That's more of the, like, I live in New York City with my wife now, and everybody always has like their preferred bagel and they'll fight about it. I could care less. Like, bagels are fine. But I'm a Geno's East guy, and most people are Malnati's. I like Geno's because it's got the cornmeal crust.
Okay.
And my literal origin story is I was late when my mom was pregnant with me, and she called up her OBGYN and said, what can we do to get this kid out? And he said, tell you what, eat an entire Geno's East pepperoni pizza tonight by yourself. And if that doesn't get the baby out, come on in tomorrow. And I showed up like 6 hours later.
Have you shared that story before?
I have not. That's a world premiere.
That's great. Thank you for the exclusive. And that was actually gonna be my second question. Like, what's your favorite pizza place? And my buddy Ian said you have to ask him that. Hey, I know we're kind of pressed for time, so I'm just gonna get into it. I want to start off with a joke, and I appreciate the honor of you going to update your LinkedIn based off my bio for you. But I have something else that you should have in the about section. And it's something you actually referenced in your book. Hopefully this joke lands. But just, you've achieved a lot, regardless of all your accolades and accomplishments, success and milestones. Just remember one thing. President Obama wrote the 2004 convention speech himself, and he spoke at Northwestern in 2006.
That's right. And he never lets me forget either one. He still reminds us that he wrote the 04 speech by himself. And when I gave the commencement address at Northwestern in 2018, I went and told him because I was all excited about it. And he goes, that's great. I did that 12 years ago. I was like, dude, like, not everything has to be a competition. You were the president of the United States. You win. Okay. Like, give me one thing.
You've won, man. You've won at life.
Yeah,
okay.
Give me one thing.
Yeah. But for you specifically, why is life great right now?
Life's great because I have two awesome little kids. My daughter is 4.5. My son just turned 1.
On May 11th, right?
Yeah. My daughter was born on Veterans Day, and then my son was born pure accident 6 months the day after. So they share a half birthday.
Nice.
Couldn't have made that up. But it's just, I'm so fortunate right now to, I'm still a speechwriter writing for a whole bunch of people, but that gives me the flexibility and freedom to be down on the floor playing with my son Jack, for an hour or two every day. That I just couldn't do if I had to go to work at some big company or something. So I'm
Yeah.
very grateful for that.
And congrats on the honorary doctorate. Is that something you just got recently too, right?
Yeah, it was really nice. Salve Regina asked me to come give the commencement address this past May and gave me an honorary doctorate of the humanities,
Yeah.
or humane letters, they call it, which was really cool. But I love being able to do that. It's the third time I've given a commencement address, and there's just, there's something that'll restore your faith in humanity when you spend a bunch of time with young people and college students. It's one of the reasons I teach. It just continually refreshes you, and to be able to share some words of wisdom and advice, whether or not they resonate with the students, is always a really great gift.
Love it. That actually leads me to something I wrote about in the book Grace, and again, it's phenomenal. I've actually been recommending and gifting that book to people.
Thank you.
So if
Thanks
you
for
start
reading.
to see like a raise in checks, whatever, like you're welcome, Cody. But when I say speech cave, what comes to mind?
My windowless office underneath the Oval Office in the West Wing. Stress comes to mind. It's I would never once compare anything that I've done in my entire life to serving in the military, but that is like my form of PTSD,
Yeah.
much smaller. To work in a windowless office and to constantly be under stress and pressure. Slept in there a lot, struggled with what to say in there a lot. Dealt with a bunch of human tragedy in there a lot in different parts of the world. So I'm glad I never have to go back there, as wonderful as it was to serve. But spending all those years in that office is not something I want to do again.
I can actually relate because by my job in the military was I'm still actually active duty. I'm just on terminal leave, but I was an intelligence analyst, and my whole career I served 23 years. We worked in windowless buildings, so just reading about the speech cave and the poor lighting, I think is what you said specifically. Like I can 100% relate to that, and the high stress. Um, there was a special note that you put in there, just referencing about the speech cave, and I read that you had your office walls decorated with your grandfather's World War II medals. Is that right? Did I get that right?
Yeah, my mom had them put in a frame, God knows how long ago. But they're important to have them in my office, and not a lot of people saw my office, so it wasn't to try to show off or anything.
Yeah.
But he had what so many other people gathered through. He was in the European theater and North Africa for 3 years during World War II.
Think about
And
that,
this is
Cody.
like,
How crazy is that?
yeah, and what I tried to infuse in speeches whenever he wrote about troops or veterans or something for Memorial Day is these were, he was a kid, really, when he got drafted into World War II. First time he's probably left the state of Indiana was to do basic training at Otis Air Force Base in Massachusetts. And then first time he leaves the country, he lands in, I think, Tunisia or Morocco, does Northern Africa, does 3 beach landings, 3 smaller D-days, basically, in Italy, and then fights. He was in the 36th Division. They go through Italy, France, ultimately liberated a concentration camp in Germany, and it's like, this is what you do in your 20s, And then he went back to Indiana quietly, got married, had kids, and became a school teacher for the rest of his life. Teaching history and French. And French, he just picked up at war, and I didn't appreciate it when I was a kid because, you're just too young to really fathom all that. And, he died when I was in high school. And fortunately, he wrote all these incredible letters to his future wife. And so I have those to hang on to. And my grandma told us once, he never talked about the war again when he came back. He had shrapnel in his leg till the day he died, an old man. She said he mentioned once that he killed people and never talked about it again. And it's extraordinary. So it was the type of thing I liked to just have there to remind me that, it's not like I'm trying to claim any of his valor, but it reminded me that I am a part of something larger in this country, this longer continuum that we all belong to. And, if we don't continue to live or act in a way that honors what that generation lived and acted for, then something profound is going to be lost.
Yeah, well, that's well put. So thanks for sharing that. And I just want to say you serve too, and I there's more ways to serve than just being in the uniform. And I think regardless of what anyone's personal opinion is on President Obama, no one can deny his speaking ability. It's undeniable. I like
Yeah,
you
well,
talk. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Cody.
no, I was just say thanks for that, but things so easily get politicized isn't the right word that I'm looking for, but we can now choose basically the truths we want, and make
Yeah,
sure that we're surrounded by voices and consume content that only match those truths. And there's also such a thing as reality. And if people go look at any speech Obama ever gave, whether on a forward operating base or Veterans Day or Memorial Day, you're not going to find anything in there that could even be possibly construed as offensive, let alone a guy, something coming from a guy who had nothing but the most profound, not just respect for the troops,
yeah.
um, but best interests at heart. They weren't, to him, they were not props. They're not something you tried out on your birthday. These are, that's why he went to West Point when he wanted to outline his Afghan war strategy, because he wanted to talk directly to the young people that he was about to send into harm's way, because he took
Yeah.
that very, very seriously.
No, and that's one of my favorite things about the book. Your book, Grace, was the pictures were really cool too because you could I felt like I was there. You could see it, right? Obviously with the visual, but I like the parts where you had the drafts of the speech. But I like, you talked about having stuff up in your from your grandfather's medals just hanging up in your office. You have had, or like, of all the speeches that you wrote, or at least had influence on, which ones would you want your grandchildren to hang on their walls?
Good question. The list begins with Selma. That's his best speech. He agrees that's his best speech.
Yeah.
It was on the 50th anniversary of the marches from Selma to Montgomery, and it's. I remember. I'm almost positive it was George W. Bush's chief speechwriter Michael Gerson who said after that speech that this is a speech that every child should read in school, because it was a truer story of American history, and it was cast in a way of, it talks about how we can point out our flaws and our shortcomings because they make us better. And what makes America unique is that we have this unique ability to change. We're not necessarily beholden to any one bloodline or faith, and that's what makes us, strong and interesting. And it's his truest vision of what this country is and what it can be. It was, a friend of mine called it patriotism for grown-ups, which I always really appreciated. But it's just a great, joyful, optimistic speech about who we are and what we can be.
Which friend was that? I'll have to
It was
tag
John
him in.
Lovett. John Lovett called it patriotism for grown-ups on an episode of Pod Save America.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. Um,
Yeah, and what's cool about it is one of my favorite riffs in that speech is actually going to be carved into the side of the Obama Presidential Center when it opens next year.
I just applied for the Bush Presidential Leadership Scholars Program, and obviously, I hope I get into it. But it's kind of cool to
Me too.
have the opportunity to potentially meet. Obviously, President Bush is part of it. President Clinton. And I think for anyone like that, I mean, there's only a handful of living presidents, so just that opportunity and just the chance to meet them and stuff is pretty exciting. Um, One question I specifically wanted to ask you is that speech writing is often invisible, and like people know you now, or at least are starting to know more of you, but at the time, you're definitely the man in the shadows behind the scenes, obviously. But how do you balance being the voice behind the words while staying out of the spotlight?
Yeah, it's. I always feel a little complicated about it, or conflicted about it rather, because we're not supposed to exist.
Yeah.
We are supposed to stay out of the way. In fact, it goes all the way back to, it was FDR did there was a commission called, I think it was the Brownlow or Brownlee Commission, on what kind of public service should be like after World War II, what the federal government should look like, who are the types of people that we would want to serve and help the country. And one of the things that it required was a fierce passion for anonymity. and should specifically apply to speechwriters. Unfortunately, we, for better or worse, we live in a world now where, um, you know, it now sounds quaint and outdated to say cable networks have 24 hours to fill. Now, content creators have just an insatiable vacuum that they have to fill at all times. And so we worked in the White House, and the White House press corps is in the same building. So it's not a secret as to who people are. My immediate predecessor, John Favreau, became pretty famous during the '08 campaign because Obama was giving, kind of uniquely great speeches, and everybody was interested in we always like to tease him because every profile of John had the word wonderkind in it somewhere.
Yeah. You're better looking, by the
And
way.
then and then, I'm God bless you, but I won't let him hear that. But as his successor, people are obviously immediately concerned or interested in like who I am, right? And it's weird. I never dealt well with it. The first time kind of the veil was lifted was after the president's eulogy in Tucson, Arizona, for a bunch of people who were murdered in a mass shooting there that targeted a congresswoman in her event. And the Today Show mentioned me the next morning. Now I slept through it because we didn't get back from Arizona till like 3 a.m. But I wake up to, I think, like 400 emails, which was slightly higher than usual. And once I finally like started rifling through and figured out what happened, it was a little frightening, to really lose your anonymity like that. There were reporters calling my parents and my sister trying to get stories, and it's strange, and it's always been strange. Now it's helpful when the time comes to sell a book later on, but I like being as anonymous as possible.
What is one mistake young speechwriters tend to make?
Great question. Like I mentioned, I teach speechwriting to seniors at my alma mater, Northwestern University. Go Cats! And there are a couple mistakes. One is trying to write too lofty. Like in my day when I was a college student, it was still JFK, right? And you're trying to write everything up here when it doesn't have to be, when it has to be more, down here. A big mistake everybody makes, young or not, is you really just want to talk like a human being.
Yeah.
Talk colloquially, talk on the level. Obama's known for his speeches, but very few of them did he deploy really lofty language, and it was almost always eulogies, maybe a speech to the British Parliament, but the rest of the time he's talking to us the way we talk to each other, and that's what resonates. It's the quality of ideas would lift the speeches, but talking on a human level is what connects.
I love the another like great thing about your book is that you do a phenomenal job of setting the scene, just describing everything. Like I could picture Jen Psaki walking down the steps when she was 9 months pregnant, or her getting a breakfast sandwich, or you talking to President Obama and he's wearing a white polo shirt with jeans and you're waiting on your chicken tenders from the Navy mess. So it's just I love the description. It's just very captivating. But now, hindsight, what is it, 2020 or 50-50 or whatever the phrase is, you have all this experience now. Are there any specific moments in terms of your speech writing that you thought were great at the time, but now you look back and it just makes you cringe, that wasn't captured in the book?
Fortunately, there's nothing that really makes me cringe. And that doesn't mean, I'm so great. What it means is that there were usually 70 people in the White House who looked at every draft of every speech before it even went to Obama. So it's really hard to make a mistake. It's really hard to do something that is, profoundly stupid. You don't really slip anything through like that. And then once he looks at it, he's the most important backstop of all. So, no, but at the same time, I would go back in time and keep editing and revising every speech. I mean, I don't believe a piece of writing is ever done. I think it's always alive. My least favorite part of any drafting process is writing that first page, getting the very first draft down. I love the 90% that's just revising, just swimming in the words, exploring a sentence, catching a sentence that you haven't noticed in a few days and saying, oh, I can make this better. That's where the real fun lies in writing. So yeah, I'd still go back. Even our best speeches, I'd go back and keep working on them.
If you had the opportunity to write a speech for President Obama today, what would the theme be?
Oh, well, I mean, look, it's hard to look at what's happening right now in the country and be passive about it. I'd try to have him, first and foremost, one of his great skills was crafting a coherent story out of everything that's going on. And that's one of the things that we've lost as a country. And I'm kind of removing politics from the equation for a second between, I was just reading something before about how, we used to have just the big three networks, right? And everybody watched kind of the same things. Like 100 million people watched the series finale of MASH,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I mean, I remember my parents watching it, right? I remember them watching the last episode of The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, the last episode of Cheers. And that you'd get basically the only thing we have now like that is the Super Bowl. Whereas the most watched scripted show last year finale was like 4 million people. So we have fewer shared stories and common stories as a people but now you can find, millions of individual stories, but what you consume and what I consume might be so different and alien to one another that it can feel like none of us have anything in common. And one of Obama's skills was cutting through the noise and forging a story that resonates with, kind of wide swaths of people. So, and that's what I think is missing right now from basically any serious Democratic politician is the ability to step back from kind of the daily onslaught of news. There are days now where like a massive plane crash ends up being like the fourth biggest story of the day, and it's easy to just get lost. So what he and I would do in this moment is sit down together for maybe an hour and just talk about what is the common thread that runs through all of this. What is something that people can take and hold on to make sense of this moment and run with it before you get into, kind of specific instructions or ideas.
Do any speeches come to mind that were your kind of like your personal favorite, but they didn't get that attention they deserve? And because there were so many bangers. Because as I was reading the book, I was actually.
You mean ours?
Yeah.
You mean Obama's speeches?
Yeah. Was there like there?
Yeah.
There were so many things. It's crazy to think about all the things that happened in a short amount of time. Like everyone knows the events, but when you break it down timeline, it's like real. Like it just gives you. I'm actually getting goosebumps right now. And all the speeches were incredible. But again, like were there outside of the major events, but just any random speech that you're like, oh, this is a really good speech, but it didn't get the attention that it deserves.
Well, a speechwriter thinks that about every speech. None of our speeches get the attention they deserve. Yeah, I mean, we wrote 3,477 while we were there. 577, one of those numbers.
So I think it's important to note right here that he couldn't do it by himself, because I read on a side note that he thought he didn't need speechwriters. Yeah.
He couldn't do it by himself, but neither could I. I had an incredible team. There were 8 of us that I got to lead, and it was fun every day working with them. That's the worst part about being gone, is not being able to work with the same people every day anymore. Yeah, man, there were lots. Like the look. I know you're a Bears fan. The '85 Chicago Bears finally got their White House visit when Obama was there. They never got to come in '86 because they were scheduled to come the day after the Challenger exploded, and they never got that visit until I think it was 2011. So that was a great speech that should have gone farther. No, but on a more serious note, yeah, there, I wrote Obama every once in a while wanted to give like an hour-long economic speech that nobody's really asking for, but it's, again, he wants to be able to, what's the story that we all need to kind of be, and this is the important point that I was trying to make before. The importance of a common story is then you have a common baseline of facts to work off of. And that's how you create policies that help people. That's how you have debates that actually help people, rather than, chasing everything around with a fly swatter. So, I remember in 2013, he wanted to give an hour-long speech on inequality and how it's getting worse, how, what in our economy is making the top get richer and everybody else kind of gets screwed, and what can we actually do about it? And it was an hour long. And I remember, the more thoughtful economists and pundits wrote that this is Obama's most important speech. Nobody else covered it or cared, because it didn't really get political. It didn't really, there was nothing in there that was a line meant to stoke outrage, right? Which is what sells. So it just kind of went nowhere, which is a real bummer when you work that long on an hour long speech. I think his eulogy for Beau Biden was one of his most beautiful pieces of writing. But it was on a Saturday in June, so not a lot of people saw it. Things like that always kind of stick out. What's funny is every once in a while I'll see like a TikTok or a reel of a random Obama quote that I wrote, and just completely out of nowhere. And there's always this one about building Iron Man and how it's classified, and I wrote that. It was just at the top of a random high tech manufacturing speech. And it popped up in my feed the other day. I was like, hey, it's one of my favorite jokes. So that's always fun when you see something like that in the wild.
Is there anything that you think is ignored by the media right now, but will be studied by historians, let's say maybe 100 years from now?
Yeah, a lot. The media is still sort of stuck, at least the news is still stuck in this mindset where everything has to be balanced. And I don't just mean 50-50. It means like they're not allowed to look like they're criticizing one side or the other. Well, if one side is consistently breaking the law and getting taken to task by courts for it, that's something that needs to get pointed out, right?
Yeah.
Rather than just like looking for a quote from each side, because you're going to have a person say, no, you should totally do that. You have another person say, no, that's terrible. And then nobody listens. So that's something that it's the coverage, because the world's going to keep happening the way it's going to keep happening. And if we're not really shining a light on injustice and right and wrong, then we're going to have less justice and more wrong. And history will look unkindly on us for that.
I do have more serious questions, but I want to jump into some lighter stuff. And hopefully this is only the first of future. Hopefully there's other interviews that we can, or podcasts that we can do together, because there's so much more that I would just love to just dig into. And again,
Fire away.
Not so much about President Obama, but just about you. Like, I'm truly fascinated by you. But well, anyway, let me jump some quick light ones just to respect your time. If you could not be a speechwriter, what is one? And these are miscellaneous. There's no rhyme and reason, just kind of all over the place. But if you could not be a speechwriter, what is one position you would want to serve as during the Obama administration?
Great question. I was trying to think of what other jobs I'd want to do in.
I know which one I do. World, I would never want to do. I would never want to be the press secretary. And again,
no, I don't have the temperament.
Like when you think of Jen Psaki, who you referenced multiple times in the book, KJP, Kayleigh McEnany, Caroline Leavitt, like regardless of how anyone feels, I would not want that job, because there's no way they agree with every single thing the president says, but they're the ones who have to go out and deliver the message and take all the spears. But that's one job I would not want.
Yeah, I'm not good at spin. I'm really not. I'm not good at I'm not good at lying. That sounds like the lamest thing to say, like when in a presidential debate where they're like, what's your biggest flaw? It's like, oh, I care too much. I'm just not good at spin or lying. I'd be honest, and it would get us in trouble. So I can't do that job. You know what job I was always envious of in the White House was the advanced team. This was a great team of some of the most fun, smartest people in the White House they'd literally go advance every presidential event. So if Obama's going to go do an event in Tulsa next week, they'll be on the ground in Tulsa a week out. They work with Secret Service to look at motorcade routes, places Obama can go that are safe to hold, either rallies or just visit a coffee shop. They'll get to know everything about that place, so that by the time we arrive, like the traveling circus, Obama and the traveling staff, everything is so easy for us. We don't have to see all the hard work that went into it. Like, they just give us a memo. There's like, here's what you need to know today. Here's what you need to be when. Boom, done. And then as soon as we leave, they're off to the next city. They're basically roadies for like Metallica or Guns N' Roses or something. And they have so much fun together because they're always on the road together, right? They're not stuck behind a desk in Washington. They're just on the road 300 days a year, having a blast. And it was always fun to get to catch up with them and see them in multiple different cities and or abroad. So I would have enjoyed that, because I've always had some serious wanderlust.
That's cool. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's a great answer. Speaking of music, let's go back to your time walking around the campus in Northwestern. You had an MP3 with 15 songs on it. What was your most played song?
Oh man, in college, they'd probably all be embarrassing, but I'm in my gym playlist in college was like a lot of Linkin Park, and Biggie, Jay-Z. Guns N' Roses, of course. But I'm trying to think of what I would listen to on like a daily basis walking around. What was big in 99, 2000? Sheesh. I listened to a lot of Zeppelin and the Stones in
Okay.
college. Um, you know what? The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill came out my freshman year, and that was in heavy rotation pretty much everywhere I went on Northwestern's campus that year.
Yeah, that's good. All right. I know you played quarterback in high school. With all the extra knowledge and experience, yeah, you now possess, what speech would you give in a huddle?
Good question. Good question. Um, Execute. You know, I feel like it's important to point out that I was not a good high school quarterback, and a lot of that came from coaching. We really could have benefited from a better coaching staff. You know, just a few years after my entire class graduated, my team won state championship with an entirely new coaching staff. Um, don't get me wrong, I liked our coaches, but I didn't know what I was doing half the time. You know, and it showed. You know, so execution is key. I visualize everything now before I go out and do it. Um, I don't have a lot of regrets in life. I'm very grateful to be able to say that. A lot of them are actually on the football field. Like there are plays that just stick in my memory forever. That if I had just evaded, you know, one more sack or put 2 extra yards on the ball, it would have been a touchdown. Like I wish I could go back in time and do
Yeah.
all that again. But you don't get to do that. So preparation became so important. It's you know probably the one thing I took from being a quarterback into the White House once I actually led a team in the White House team of 8 is communication, execution, making sure everybody knows their roles, and trust is a really important part of that too. You got to trust that someone's going to get your blind side, or you know, as for a speechwriter, um, you know, tell you what your spots are. Um, you got to trust people to do their jobs. You can't, if you're a quarterback, you can't stand there in the pocket and make sure someone's hitting their block, make sure someone's running the right route. You got to trust them, and you got to put that ball where they're supposed to be. And you know, the same was true in speechwriting in the White House, or probably any other job.
That's cool. Um, all right, here's a random question. If you could write a speech for a fictional character, who would it be?
uh, you know what? I'm just going to go with the cheese because it's true. Superman.
Okay.
Superman. I've always been a Superman guy. I'm so excited for the movie this summer,
Yeah.
and it's because you know Batman's freaking awesome. Of course, Batman's awesome. He can do anything, but Superman is not ashamed to be an idealist. He is not ashamed to be optimistic. In fact, it's part of his job
Yeah.
to be the example that people need, um, unironically, um, and not to be worried that people might think you're old fashioned or naive, because somebody has to set those examples, you know, for the rest of us to follow. So, fictional character, I would write a speech for Superman.
Nice.
How cool would that be?
That would be awesome. My favorite superhero of all time. This I know it's going to sound crazy. Is Green Lantern. I know he's not the most popular, but I've always been a Green Lantern fan. But love Superman too.
Well, which one? Hal Jordan, John
See, that's
Stewart,
it.
Guy Gardner?
That's why. That's why I love Green Lantern because it's multiple Green Lanterns, so it can be different people. I'll say John Stewart because he was a Marine, but that's what I love about the Green Lantern. It doesn't have to be one person. Like each sector or universe or galaxy has it's a core of people. Um, but yeah, that's and I'll probably say Kyle Raniere because I'm 43. So in the
Forgot about that.
90s, he was the
Yeah.
comic book version, and he was an artist, and so I'm a in addition, I'm so much more to being in the military. I'm an actor, I'm a podcaster, I'm a writer. So I think I relate to that version of the Green Lantern.
There you go. Well, John Stewart was an architect too. That's why his constructs are always so good.
I actually didn't think about it. I didn't know. Yeah, good call, man.
He was an architect before he joined the Marines. Listener, you didn't know you were going to nerd out to DC Comics today.
So you mentioned like going back into time to like call an extra play or just avoid that one extra sack. If you could go back in time and write a speech for a past president, who would it be?
Oh, good question. Let me give you two answers. For president, I'd pick JFK. I mean, it seems pretty obvious, but that was an era where anything still felt possible, and where public service was something people aspired to. And there was this call for the best and the brightest, and we hadn't all fallen prey to the lie that government is this big wasteful problem in everyone's life. And I always loved that. My favorite non-Obama speech is Kennedy's speech at Rice University, where he basically laid out the rationale for the space program.
Is this the
And
noon speech?
the noon speech. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I had to think about that for a second. Yeah, he said, "Why does Rice play Texas?" The whole thing was infused with optimism and humor, and it did something crazy that the cynicism the cynical world we live in now, cynicism just infuses everything from, the coverage of a speech to the way it's received. For him to basically go up there and say that within a decade we're going to create a space program from scratch, put someone on the moon, and bring him home is nuts. No one would go for that now. They'd say you're insane. And the crazy thing about it is that we actually went and did it. And then non-president would be his brother Bobby, because he gave this series of speeches on the 68 campaign that was fearless and honest, and talked about all of our flaws and failings as a country, who we were letting down. And there's nothing un-American about that. That's what people say now, right? It's like, if you point anything out, you're talking down the country's un-American. No, it's not. You can't make yourself better until you know what your flaws are, right? And if you can't talk about your flaws and your failings, then as a country, we're not going to know what we need to address. And that's really what's always made America so great, is that we have the capacity to change. We have these, this system of government, and this kind of, wild youth and spirit that together means you can do pretty extraordinary things. And so, while I never got to write for either of them, I did get to write for the youngest Kennedy brother for a couple of years, Teddy. And I was very lucky to kind of learn from him and just pick up some of that by osmosis.
Yeah, and I that's actually a great part of the book as well, is your experience on that, because that was basically like kind of your break into the game, right? Being on that Kennedy campaign. Quick JFK story, and I do have one last question because I know you got to get out of here. But I had my retirement ceremony last month, and I'm stationed in Ohio. Their Air Force Museum is here, and my retirement ceremony was in front of the Air Force One that's on display. It was Kennedy's Air Force One.
That's cool.
And it's the one that they brought back his remains on, and it's the same one that Lyndon B. Johnson took the oath on as well. So it was just kind of like this cool backdrop, and you could like there's this aura that you can feel, which fits JFK, because it seemed like there's always like this magic about him, or this aura. Anyway, but that's really cool. All right, last question for now. Hopefully, I have a lot more for future interviews. But what is one piece of wisdom you would pass on to the next generation of people to help them light their own torch and carry it forward?
Sticking in the same vein, be less cynical. Be more open to hope and optimism, even if it means getting let down more often. Like we all, and I fall victim to it too, right? You kind of put your armor up. You just assume the world's going to let you down. But you know what? It's you can be wrong a lot if you expect and assume the best in other people. But the reward is much bigger when you let yourself believe that something great is possible and that it happens. And it doesn't happen without a lot of hard work and never giving up. And that's a lot of what my book was about too, and that's why I dedicated it to my wife, but also to my kids and the kids that I teach, because I want them to grow up knowing that there are a lot of people out there who are who see the world as it is and who are striving to make it better. And those are the people that I want my children to grow up and surround themselves with, not the people standing on the sidelines saying it's not worth it, you're never going to change anything. I'd rather have them be someone who fails 9 times and then succeeds the 10th in something that's going to make everybody's lives better. I think that's a life well lived.
Perfect. Cody, thank you so much. This is truly an honor. And I have a ritual where after the same book I referenced earlier, I cross out, I like to write in pencil, but I'll put a check mark next to the guest name, and it's uh, this is a big milestone for me. So thank you, Cody. I really appreciate you.
Martin, it's been a privilege. Thanks a lot. And congrats again on your retirement.
Thanks. And like, what can I do for you? How can I best serve you?
You just did it. You made me think for an hour about the thing. You helped me stretch my brain muscle, and for that, I'm always grateful.